start a society of us and have serious discussions, Gear snapped back, but honey, what would we talk about? Gear was putting it politely. Henry Gerber's comments, a leftist like Harry, who also tried to call a meeting in Chicago in the 1920s but was soon arrested, provides a blunter appraisal of the prospects Harry faced. The first difficulty, Gerber recalled, was in rounding up enough members and contributors so the work could go forward. The average homosexual I found was ignorant concerning himself. Others were fearful. Still others were frantic or depraved. Some were blasé. Many homosexuals told me that their search for forbidden fruit was the real spice of life. With this argument, they rejected our aims. We wondered how we could accomplish anything with such resistance from our own people. So how do you call a meeting of a group of people who call each other the Friends of Dorothy? And please remember, while the baleful influence of the medical model was already bearing down on queer self-esteem in these years, the word homosexual was not in common American dictionaries and would not be for another decade. Looking back now, Harry's faith in the possibility of loving ourselves and each other and his intuition that the powerful act of self-redemption we call coming out could unleash immense energies for social change seems all the more visionary. He knew that having an answer to the medical model was not enough, and indeed, the Mannerschein founders wasted little time thinking up arguments for psychiatrists. Will Geer's question was the Gordian knot that had to be cut before there could be a movement. The answer came in 1948. The story is apocryphal, but it bears repeating. That August, Harry attended a party that turned out to be all gay men. He had a copy of the Kinsey Report under his arm, and he had just come from signing a petition to place Henry Wallace's name as a candidate for president on the California ballot. Beer flowed, talk followed, and that night, a new idea was born. Now, Wallace's third-party candidacy was drawing support from many activists like Harry, whose roots lie in the popular front politics of the 1930s and 40s. This was the period when American communists forged alliances with a wide range of groups that opposed fascism and the worst ills of capitalism. In America, opposing fascism meant fighting racism and aiding those targeted by it, especially African Americans. The party lent aid to African American causes and organizations, and wide-ranging discussions among party intellectuals extended Marxist principles to make the case that cultural, racial, and ethnic minorities had common cause with the working class, over and against an older view that considered minorities the byproduct of capitalism's attempt to divide and conquer. In Southern California, not uniquely, but especially, African Americans were one of several groups experiencing racism, and they all had a common enemy in brutally repressive law enforcement agencies and local governments dominated by business interests. The commies worked with them all. And so, in mid-20th century Los Angeles, as Daniel Hurwitz shows in his marvelous book, we see the chrysalis of what was to come, multiculturalism, an analysis of the relationship between class and racism and sexism, and the ever-shifting coalitional politics that are now so characteristic of the American city. Meanwhile, at a party at an apartment in LA, the discussion ranged from Kinsey and his startling revelation of the frequency of homosexuality to the Wallace campaign. Harry tossed out the idea that a discrete organization, calling itself perhaps Bachelors for Wallace, could lobby for a plank in the platform supporting the right to privacy. The idea took off. But at dawn's early light, when the revelers straggled home to sleep it off, Harry was pouring coffee and sitting down at the typewriter. When he pulled out the last sheet of paper, he had created a prospectus of brazen scope. It projected an organization that would engage in full-out civil rights advocacy, provide social and legal services, have a research and education division, and offer social and cultural activities. And if that weren't bold enough, the prospectus had the audacity to cite in its support two of the major international statements on human rights of the World War II era, the Atlantic Charter and that of the United Nations. And in this text, Harry used the word minority 14 times. Here as androgynous minority, but that qualifier was soon replaced with homophile, or homosexual, then later, gay, fairy, third gender, and others. But the denominator was always minority. And this is new. The other Mattershine organizers challenged him to flesh out the idea. Chuck Rowland, and Chuck, by the way, besides being one of the sweetest men you could have ever known, played a role in Mattershine no less important than Harry's. Chuck recalled, "I kept saying, what is our theory? Having been a communist, you've got to work with a theory. What is our basic principle that we're building on?" And Harry said, "We are an oppressed cultural minority." And I said, "That's exactly it." Harry's ideas were discussed extensively by the founders, interminably, some of them remembered, at discussion groups, and in presentations by Harry. When the group adopted a mission statement in 1951, homosexuals were referred to as an oppressed minority. The organizers put the theory to practice. The thesis states we are a group, so discussions were centered around questions the thesis generates. What do we have in common? What experiences do we share? How can we help each other? The results were powerfully cathartic, and by 1953, the discussion groups had gone viral. The most fully developed version of the thesis is in notes Harry wrote in 1960. He begins by borrowing the definition of cultural minorities from a text he used in his Marxist classes, and one often cited in the party's discussion about African Americans, which states, "A nation," which here has the sense of a people or minority within a larger state, "is a historically evolved, stable community of language, territory, economic life, and psychological makeup, manifested in a community of culture. No single characteristic is determinative in constituting a minority, only a sum total of characteristics of which, when nations are compared, one characteristic, national character, or another, language, or a third, territory, economic conditions, stands out in sharper relief." As Harry sums it up, all groups whose motivating persuasions and/or fundamental